I guess every successful woman needs one dependent, Mason Reed said, raising his champagne glass toward me. And Lauren brought hers tonight. The laughter came fast, polished, and effortless, the kind people use when they want the person with the highest title to know they understand the joke. I stood beside my wife beneath a chandelier bright enough to turn every crystal glass into a small flame, and I watched Lauren smile. Not nervously, not apologetically. She smiled like Mason had said something clever. My name is Ethan Cole, and that was the moment I realized the most humiliating part of the evening would not be what her coworkers thought of me. It would be discovering what my wife had allowed herself to believe. The Northbridge Dynamics annual gala filled the top ballroom of the Halston Hotel in downtown Chicago, 30 floors above streets shining with December rain. Men in tailored tuxedos gathered around the bar, while women in evening gowns moved between white linen tables decorated with silver branches and winter roses. A string quartet played near the windows, almost hidden beneath the low hum of executives discussing acquisitions, promotions, and people who were not in the room to defend themselves. Lauren belonged there. At least, that was how she carried herself. Her dark green gown matched the company colors, and every few feet someone stopped her to congratulate her on the latest campaign or ask when she would finally become senior vice president. She answered each question with the calm confidence of someone who had spent years preparing to be noticed. I had always admired that about her. Tonight, I barely recognized it. When we arrived, a young event coordinator handed Lauren a place card embossed in gold. Table 1. Executive Leadership. Then she searched through the remaining cards for mine. Her smile weakened. Mr. Cole, it looks like you're at table 14. Lauren glanced at the card and gave a small laugh. There must have been a mix-up. Table 14 sat near the service doors, beside a speaker and behind a decorative column that blocked half the stage. It was where vendors, junior assistants, and last-minute guests had been placed. Lauren could have corrected it. She knew everyone running the event. Instead, she touched my arm and said, "You won't mind, will you? I need to sit with the leadership team tonight." Her tone was soft, but it was not a question. "Of course," I said. She kissed my cheek without looking at me and disappeared into the crowd. I stood there holding the card, listening to the quartet glide into another song, while waiters carried trays of champagne past me. Across the ballroom, Margaret Whitmore, chairwoman of the Northbridge board, looked directly at me. She started to rise from her seat. I gave her the smallest shake of my head. She stopped. No one else noticed. I took my place at table 14 beside a software supplier from Milwaukee and 2 assistants who spent most of dinner checking their phones. From where I sat, I could see Lauren laughing with Mason Reed, Northbridge's chief strategy officer. Mason leaned close when he spoke, one hand resting on the back of her chair as if the space belonged to him. Richard Halston, the CEO, sat on her other side, holding court with the confidence of a man who believed the company's future had already been secured. They had no idea how recently that future had changed hands. Halfway through dinner, Lauren finally waved me over. By then, Mason had emptied enough champagne to confuse cruelty with charm. He looked me up and down as I approached. "There he is," he said. "The mystery husband." A few people turned. Lauren's smile tightened, but she said nothing. Mason asked what I did for work. I told him I handled private investments and occasional consulting. It was the answer I had given for years because it was accurate, simple, and usually ended the conversation. Mason laughed. "That sounds like something unemployed people say at reunions." The table erupted again. Richard lowered his eyes toward his drink, pretending not to hear. Lauren could have ended it with one sentence. Instead, she tilted her head and said, "Ethan prefers a slower pace. I'm the one with the real career in our house." More laughter. Something inside me went still. I did not raise my voice. I did not leave. I simply looked at the woman I had married 17 years earlier and understood that this was not a performance she had created for the gala. This was the version of our marriage she had been selling when I was not in the room. My phone vibrated inside my jacket. I pulled it out beneath the table and read the message from Gray Haven's general counsel. Closing confirmed. All signatures complete. Board announcement at 9:30. I checked the time. 9:07. Mason lifted his glass again. "Come on, Ethan. Don't look so serious. We're only having fun." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and met his smile. "I know," I said. "That's why I think you should enjoy the next 23 minutes. Mason stared at me for half a second, waiting for the punchline, then laughed louder than before. 23 minutes until what? He asked. I reached for the glass of sparkling water a waiter had placed beside me. Until the announcement, I said. Richard Halston looked up at that, but Lauren stepped in before he could ask what I meant. Ethan has always enjoyed being mysterious, she said. Her smile was smooth, practiced, and empty. It makes consulting sound more exciting. Mason grinned and turned toward the others, already searching for another joke. I stopped listening. The ballroom remained warm, but something between Lauren and me had gone cold enough to preserve every word exactly as it was spoken. 17 years earlier, she would never have let anyone speak to me that way. Back then, we lived in a one-bedroom apartment outside Evanston, less than 800 square feet, with thin walls and a radiator that clanked through every winter night. Lauren attended business school after work, carrying textbooks thick enough to fill half our kitchen table. I was building a logistics software company with two friends in a rented warehouse near the river. We had folding chairs, second-hand computers, and a coffee maker that leaked across the counter. Nothing about our life looked impressive, but it belonged to us. Some nights Lauren studied beside me until 2 in the morning while I reviewed code and customer contracts. She would fall asleep with a yellow marker in her hand, and I would drape my jacket over her shoulders. When tuition came due, I paid what her scholarship did not cover. I never called it a sacrifice. She was my wife. Her future was part of mine. When my company signed its first national client, Lauren brought grocery store cupcakes to the warehouse and placed candles in them because we could not afford champagne. She stood on a wooden shipping pallet, raised a paper cup, and told everyone I was the most determined man she knew. I remembered the pride in her face. I remembered believing it would last. Years later, when the company sold, reporters wanted photographs, interviews, and a story about overnight success. There had been nothing overnight about it. There had been 12 years of missed weekends, unpaid invoices, and mornings when failure sat across from me like an expected guest. I gave a few interviews, attended the closing dinner, and then stepped away from public view. My closest business partner, Daniel Mercer, had died from a heart condition 6 months before the sale. He was 46. At his memorial, his teenage son said he knew his father mainly through airport calls and photographs from conferences. That sentence stayed with me. I did not want to spend the rest of my life collecting companies while losing every person waiting at home. I founded Greyhaven Capital quietly. No headquarters with my name across the entrance. No magazine profiles. We purchased struggling businesses, repaired what was broken, and left capable people in charge. I worked more selectively. I cooked dinner. I attended Lauren's events. I tried to become present in the life I had once been too busy to notice. At first, she said she admired the change. Then her promotions came. Manager, director, vice president. Each new title brought a new circle of people who measured worth by visibility. When they asked what I did, Lauren used to say I was an investor. Later, she said I was semi-retired. By the previous spring, I heard her tell a colleague that I was figuring out my next chapter. She laughed when she said it. I pretended not to hear. That had become my mistake. I kept confusing silence with patience. When Lauren stopped inviting me to dinners, I told myself she needed space to build her own reputation. When she removed photographs of us from her office, I accepted her explanation that the communications team wanted a cleaner background for video meetings. When she began introducing herself as Lauren Bennett, using her maiden name professionally, I said I understood. Every explanation made sense alone. Together, they formed a truth I had refused to name. Lauren was not protecting her success from my shadow. She was editing me out of the picture. Ethan, her voice pulled me back into the ballroom. She stood beside me now, still smiling for the people around us. Could I speak with you? We walked several feet toward the windows, where the city stretched below us in grids of white and red light. Rain traced narrow lines down the glass. Her smile disappeared the moment no one was watching. What was that comment about an announcement? She asked. You made Richard nervous. Did I? This is important for me, she said. Tonight could affect my promotion. I looked past her toward table 1, where Mason was telling another story with his hands spread wide. Then perhaps you should be more careful about the company you keep. Her eyes narrowed. Do not embarrass me tonight. The words settled between us. Not do not let them embarrass you. Not I am sorry. Do not embarrass me. My phone vibrated again. A message from Margaret appeared on the screen. We are ready. I lifted my eyes to the clock above the ballroom doors. 9:28. You should return to your table, I told Lauren. Why? I slipped the phone into my pocket as the quartet finished its song. Across the room, Margaret rose and walked toward the stage. Because the part of the evening that affects your future is about to begin. Margaret reached the podium and waited until the room settled. Conversations faded in layers, first near the stage, then across the tables, until only the soft clink of glassware remained. Lauren stayed beside me for 1 second longer, studying my face as though she might find an explanation written there. Then Richard gestured sharply for her to return to table 1. She walked away without another word. I watched her take her seat. Between Richard and Mason, back straight, expression composed. She had always been good at recovering in public. Margaret adjusted the microphone. Northbridge Dynamics was founded 32 years ago on the belief that good technology should solve real problems, she began. Tonight, we honor that history, but we must also speak honestly about our future. A ripple moved through the executives. Richard lifted his chin. Mason stopped smiling. I remained near the windows, outside the circle of tables, exactly where Lauren had left me. Margaret spoke about declining margins, delayed product launches, and the pressure of expanding too quickly. Her words were careful, but no one in that ballroom mistook them for celebration. Northbridge was not collapsing. Not yet. But it had spent 2 years pretending that warning signs were temporary inconveniences. Revenue projections had been revised 3 times. Several senior engineers had resigned. A major client had postponed a contract worth nearly $40 million. Richard had called it a timing issue. Greyhaven had called it evidence. That was how the review began. 6 months earlier, one of my partners placed a Northbridge report on my desk and told me the company had strong products, talented employees, and leadership that seemed more interested in appearances than operations. I almost passed. Then I saw Lauren's name on the executive chart. I knew investing in her company could complicate our marriage. What I did not know was how little marriage remained to complicate. I assigned the review to a separate team and removed myself from the early negotiations. I wanted the numbers to speak without my personal history leaning over them. The numbers spoke clearly. Northbridge had value. It also had rot hidden beneath polished presentations. Greyhaven began purchasing shares through 3 holding companies, each transaction legal, quiet, and separated from my name. By the time Richard understood that someone was building a controlling position, the structure was nearly complete. He contacted Greyhaven twice asking for assurances that the new investor would not interfere with management. Our attorneys gave him the only answer the agreement allowed. Ownership details would be disclosed after closing. Richard interpreted silence as weakness. People often did. That was another reason I had left public life. When my first company sold, strangers treated visibility like proof of importance. They asked why I did not purchase a larger house, why I still drove myself, why I refused invitations to conferences where men congratulated one another for surviving meetings they had created. I had already spent too many years measuring my life in contracts and airport departures. Daniel's death changed the scale. After his memorial, I closed my office for a week and stayed home. I cooked breakfast for Lauren. I walked along Lake Michigan before sunrise. I listened when she talked about her first management position at Northbridge. For a while, slowing down felt like returning to myself. Then Lauren began looking at that choice differently. She stopped seeing restraint and started seeing retreat. When friends asked about Greyhaven, I kept the details private. Lauren filled the silence with assumptions. At first, her comments were harmless. Ethan does not care about titles. Ethan enjoys staying behind the scenes. Then the wording changed. Ethan is between projects. Ethan has enough savings to take his time. Eventually, she began speaking as though I had contributed nothing for years. The strangest part was that I let her. I thought correcting her would sound insecure. I thought a strong marriage did not require a financial resume. I believed the woman who had studied beside me in that cramped apartment remembered who I was without needing proof. Standing in that ballroom, I finally understood that memory could be rewritten when pride found a reason. Margaret continued. Over the past several months, the board has evaluated strategic options to protect our employees, our clients, and the long-term stability of this company. Richard gave a controlled nod, performing confidence for the room. Lauren glanced toward me. Our eyes met across nearly 60 feet of white linen and candlelight. For the first time that evening, she did not look embarrassed by me. She looked uncertain. Margaret placed both hands on the podium. As of 9 o'clock this evening, a transaction has been completed that changes the ownership structure of Northbridge Dynamics. The ballroom became perfectly still. Mason leaned toward Richard and whispered something I could not hear. Richard did not answer. The acquiring firm is Greyhaven Capital, Margaret said. Several people applauded cautiously. Lauren did not. She knew the name. She had heard me mention it years ago, before she stopped asking questions about my work. Her face lost a little color as she turned toward me again. Margaret allowed the reaction to settle. Greyhaven now holds 61% of Northbridge voting shares. This time, no one applauded. The number carried too much weight. Richard stared at the stage as if the floor beneath his chair had shifted. Margaret looked directly at me. The firm's founder has asked to remain private throughout negotiations. Now that the transaction is complete, that confidentiality is no longer necessary. Mason followed her gaze. Then Richard did. Then Lauren. One by one, heads turned in my direction. Margaret stepped away from the microphone and extended her hand toward the place where I stood. It is my privilege to introduce the new controlling owner of Northbridge Dynamics, Mr. Ethan Cole. Margaret's voice carried through the ballroom with such clarity that, for a moment, the name did not feel like mine. It seemed to belong to someone else, someone the room had been waiting to meet. Then the first head turned fully toward me. Then another. Then all of them. I stepped away from the window and began walking toward the stage. My shoes made almost no sound against the carpet, yet every step felt louder than the applause that had not started. Mason's expression changed first. The grin vanished from his face, leaving behind the confusion of a man who had just realized the joke had been aimed in the wrong direction. Richard remained seated, one hand still wrapped around his champagne glass, his eyes fixed on me with the rigid concentration of someone rereading a contract in his mind. Lauren did not move at all. She stared at me from table one, her lips slightly parted, her shoulders held straight by habit rather than confidence. The distance between us was less than 60 feet, but it felt wider than the 17 years behind us. I passed table 14, where the software supplier from Milwaukee stood, and began clapping. One of the assistants joined him. The sound spread slowly, uncertain at first, then stronger as others followed. It was not admiration. Most of them did not know me. It was instinct. People applaud when power enters a room, especially when they are still trying to understand where it came from. Margaret offered me her hand when I reached the stage. "Congratulations, Ethan," she said quietly. "Thank you, Margaret." I stepped behind the podium and looked out at the ballroom. From there, I could see everything Lauren had wanted me not to see. The executive tables near the front. The investors grouped by importance. The employees pushed toward the back. The empty seat beside my wife. The small gold place card at table 14 where someone had decided I belonged. I did not feel triumphant. That surprised me. For months, I had imagined the closing as a business milestone, the moment Greyhaven secured a company worth saving. I had not imagined standing under chandeliers while my wife looked at me like a stranger. "Good evening," I said. My voice came through the speakers calm and even. I understand this announcement may be unexpected. A few nervous laughs moved through the room. Mason did not join them. Greyhaven Capital has completed the purchase of a controlling interest in Northbridge Dynamics. The transaction closed tonight after months of review, negotiation, and regulatory approval. Richard shifted in his chair. He knew the formal language. He also knew what it meant. Northbridge has excellent people, valuable technology, and a long history of serving its clients. It also has serious challenges that cannot be solved by speeches or optimistic projections. The room went still again. I did not look at Richard when I said it. I did not need to. Greyhaven did not invest in this company to dismantle it. We invested because we believe it can be stronger, more transparent, and more stable than it has been in recent years. Lauren's eyes stayed on me. I remembered the first time she had watched me speak to a room. It was in that rented warehouse, with 12 employees sitting on folding chairs while I explained how we would survive losing our largest customer. She had stood near the back with grocery store cupcakes and complete faith in me. That woman had known exactly who I was. I wondered when she had decided to forget. "No immediate changes will be announced tonight," I continued. A visible breath moved through several tables. Tomorrow morning, the board will meet with Greyhaven's transition team. Department leaders will receive schedules before midnight. Until then, I ask everyone to enjoy the remainder of the evening and treat one another with the respect expected inside this company. The word respect settled over the ballroom with more weight than I intended. Or perhaps exactly as much as I intended. My eyes moved toward Mason for only a second. He looked down at the table. I turned back to the room. Northbridge's future will not be determined by titles, appearances, or who tells the best story at a gala. It will be determined by facts, performance, and character. This time, no one laughed. I stepped away from the podium as applause began, louder now, though still uneven. Margaret leaned toward the microphone and thanked the guests, but I barely heard her. Lauren was already standing. She moved around the table and reached the side of the stage just as I descended the steps. "Ethan," she said. Her voice was low, stripped of the polished confidence she had worn all evening. "You own Greyhaven?" I founded it. She looked toward the people watching us, then forced her attention back to me. "Why did you not tell me?" I held her gaze. "You stopped asking what I did a long time ago." Her face tightened. "That is not fair." Neither was tonight. Mason approached from behind her, moving carefully now. "Ethan, I think there has been a misunderstanding." I looked at him. The same man who had raised his glass to embarrass me now held both hands near his sides, searching for the correct version of himself. "There has," I said. "You believed I needed your approval." Richard appeared next, his expression controlled but pale. "Mr. Cole, perhaps we should speak privately." "We will," I said. "At 8 tomorrow morning." His eyes flicked toward Margaret. "Is that necessary?" Margaret answered before I could. "The entire board will be present." Lauren touched my sleeve. It was a small gesture, familiar enough to hurt. "Can we go home and talk?" I looked at her hand, then at the empty seat beside her table. "Not yet," I said. "There is one more thing I need to understand before this night is over." The one thing I needed to understand was whether Lauren had merely failed to defend me or whether she had helped create the version of me everyone had laughed at. There is a difference between silence and intention. One can come from weakness. The other requires a choice. I asked Margaret to have the event coordinator meet us in the small conference room beside the ballroom. Lauren followed without speaking. Mason tried to come with us, but Margaret stopped him at the door. "You will have your opportunity tomorrow," she said. The room was narrow and windowless, with a polished table, 6 leather chairs, and a tray of untouched coffee cooling beneath silver lids. The laughter from the gala reached us only as a distant murmur through the wall. Lauren sat across from me and folded her hands on the table. She looked smaller without the chandeliers and the audience. Not less beautiful, less certain. "What exactly are you trying to prove?" she asked. "I am trying to find out what happened before I arrived tonight. You already embarrassed me in front of the entire company." I let the sentence settle. Even now, she believed the humiliation had begun when Margaret said my name. "I did not write the seating chart," I said. "I did not make Mason raise his glass. I did not tell the room I had no real career." Lauren looked away. The door opened, and the event coordinator stepped inside. Her name tag read Allison Grant. She could not have been older than 26. She held a tablet against her chest and looked from Margaret to me with the expression of someone who had just learned that a small administrative decision might matter far more than expected. Margaret spoke gently. "Allison, Mr. Cole has a few questions about tonight's arrangements." Allison nodded. "Of course. Who assigned me to table 14? I asked. She touched the screen and scrolled through the guest list. The executive office submitted the final seating plan on Monday. Which executive office? Her eyes moved toward Lauren. Ms. Cole's department coordinated the guest placements. Lauren sat straighter. My team handled logistics. I did not personally seat every guest. Allison hesitated. That hesitation answered before her words did. There was a note beside Mr. Cole's name, she said. What note? Lauren asked too quickly. Allison turned the tablet around. I read the sentence in silence. Spouse of Lauren Cole. Non-executive guest. Seat away from leadership unless space becomes available. The ballroom seemed farther away then, as though the wall between us had thickened. Who entered it? I asked. Allison swallowed. The account shows Ms. Cole's credentials. Lauren reached for the tablet, but Allison pulled it back instinctively. That does not mean I typed it, Lauren said. My assistant has access. Did your assistant also remove my name from your introduction? I asked. She stared at me. Earlier that week, Lauren had shown me the printed program. Her biography mentioned her education, her awards, and her commitment to building a life in Chicago. It did not mention that she was married. At the time, I had said nothing. Silence had become the most expensive habit in our home. Allison looked down again. There was another revision yesterday. The original biography referred to Mr. Cole. And the final version? Margaret asked. The reference was deleted. Lauren closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the denial was gone. I wanted tonight to be about my work, she said. Her voice was quiet now. People already assume successful women have someone financing them. If they knew who you were, every promotion I earned would look purchased. So you decided I had to look unsuccessful. That is not what I wanted. It is what you arranged. She pressed her palms together. You do not understand what it is like in that room for me. Then explain it. She looked toward the door, toward the company waiting beyond it. Richard listens to Mason more than he listens to me. The board praises my campaigns, but when decisions are made, I am still asked to take notes. I worked for years to be seen as more than someone's wife. And you thought the only way to do that was to make me less than your husband. Her face tightened. I was trying to protect what I built. We built things together once. That was different. 3 words. Softly spoken. Completely final. I remembered the apartment in Evanston, the leaking radiator, the cupcakes on the shipping pallet, and the woman who had once treated my victories as if they belonged to both of us. Somewhere along the way, partnership had become competition, and I had not even known we were keeping score. Allison shifted near the door. I thanked her and told her she could return to the gala. Margaret followed, leaving Lauren and me alone. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The coffee machine clicked as it cooled. Did you know Mason planned that toast? I asked. No. Did you tell him I was unemployed? Lauren looked down at her wedding ring. I told him you were not working full-time. That was not my question. Her silence lasted only a few seconds, but it carried years inside it. I may have let people assume things, she said. There it was. Not a confession large enough for a courtroom. Just the truth of a marriage. She had not invented every joke. She had simply prepared the room to believe them. I stood and straightened my jacket. Where are you going? Back to the gala. Why? I opened the door, and the sound of the ballroom returned, brighter and colder than before. Because tomorrow I deal with Northbridge, I said. Tonight I decide what remains of us. The ballroom had changed while we were gone. People still held champagne glasses, the quartet still played, and the city still glowed beyond the windows, but the easy confidence had disappeared. Conversation stopped when I passed. Some guests smiled too quickly. Others looked away. Power does not change a room by making everyone louder. It changes a room by making everyone careful. I walked toward the silent auction display near the stage, where framed vacation packages and charity pledges stood beneath small spotlights. Earlier that evening, Mason had asked how much a man living off his wife could afford to donate. I found the envelope I had placed there before dinner and turned it face up. $1 million to establish a scholarship fund for the children of Northbridge employees. The event coordinator stared at the amount, then at me. Is this correct, Mr. Cole? Every dollar. Mason heard her. He crossed the room with Richard close behind him. Lauren followed several steps back, but she stopped before reaching us. Mason forced a smile that did not belong on his face anymore. That is incredibly generous, Ethan. Mr. Cole is fine. The words were not sharp. They did not need to be. His smile weakened. Of course. Mr. Cole. Richard adjusted the front of his tuxedo. We should make an announcement. The guests will want to recognize such a contribution. The contribution is for the employees, I said. Not for recognition. Richard nodded as though he had suggested the same thing. Naturally. A photographer approached, but I raised one hand and asked him not to take a picture. I had spent years avoiding rooms where money became theater. The children who received those scholarships would not care which table I had occupied at a gala. They would care that tuition was paid. Mason glanced toward the stage and lowered his voice. About what happened earlier, I misread the situation. You understood the situation perfectly, I said. You thought I had no influence, so you believed respect was optional. His eyes shifted toward the people nearby. It was a joke. Jokes reveal what a person believes the room will permit. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Richard stepped between us with a diplomatic smile. Tomorrow is a fresh start. I am sure we can resolve any concerns efficiently. I looked at him. That depends on what the concerns are. His expression barely changed, but I saw the tension in his jaw. During Greyhaven's review, Richard had answered every difficult question with polished language. Delayed contracts became timing adjustments. Departing engineers became planned transitions. Declining cash reserves became strategic investment cycles. He had a phrase for every problem except the truth. Our records are open to you, he said. Good, I replied. The audit team arrives at 7. His eyes narrowed. Audit team. Operational, financial, and compliance. Mason looked at Richard. That small glance told me more than either man intended. I had seen it before in conference rooms and negotiations. It was the silent exchange between people checking whether the same secret had occurred to both of them. That seems aggressive for the first morning, Richard said. The review began 8 weeks ago. The color drained from Mason's face so gradually that someone not watching for it might have missed the change. Richard recovered first. You conducted an investigation before closing? Greyhaven does not purchase a company based on a presentation deck. I turned toward Margaret, who had joined us beside the auction table. The board packets have been delivered. They were sent at 9:35, she said. Every director has received one. Richard reached for his phone. It had begun vibrating inside his jacket. Around the ballroom, other board members were checking their screens. The celebration had become a waiting room. Lauren approached me then, careful and quiet. What investigation? She asked. The one your leadership team was informed could accompany the acquisition. No one told me. You signed the acknowledgement. Her eyes searched my face. I signed dozens of documents every week. That is not a defense. She flinched, not because I raised my voice, but because I had not. Calm words leave fewer places to hide. Am I being investigated? She asked. Your department is being reviewed with every other department. Ethan, I am your wife. Tomorrow, you are a Northbridge executive. The distinction landed between us. She looked around at the employees, the board members, and the people who had laughed with her less than an hour earlier. Now none of them came close. Status had surrounded her all evening. The moment it became uncertain, it offered no comfort. Margaret touched my shoulder and said the board's legal counsel had arrived upstairs. Richard heard her and immediately checked the time. It was 10:14. I thought the meeting was tomorrow, he said. The formal meeting is tomorrow, I replied. Tonight, counsel is preserving company records. Mason's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. I looked from him to Richard, then toward Lauren. 3 different expressions. The same fear. Not fear of me. Fear of what the documents already knew. Lauren stepped closer. What exactly did Greyhaven find? I watched 2 members of the legal team enter through the ballroom doors carrying sealed cases and company laptops. Enough, I said. To know that the way you treated me tonight is not the biggest problem in this building. The legal team moved through the ballroom without urgency, which made their presence more unsettling. They did not raise their voices or interrupt the music. They simply spoke to department heads, collected access cards, and asked several executives to remain available. Within minutes, the gala no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a building discovering that its walls had been listening. Richard pulled Margaret aside near the stage, but she ended the conversation with one sentence and walked away. Mason checked his phone 3 times before realizing his company account had been temporarily restricted. Lauren stood beside me, watching every reaction. You knew this was coming, she said. I knew questions needed answers. And you came here without warning me. I looked at her. Would a warning have changed how you treated me? She lowered her eyes. The answer was already between us. One of Greyhaven's attorneys, Rebecca Sloan, approached and handed me a slim folder. Rebecca had managed the Northbridge review from the beginning. She was calm, exact, and almost impossible to surprise. The preservation notices are active, she said. We also received confirmation from the outside accounting firm. Richard appeared beside us before I could respond. Confirmation of what? Rebecca looked at me, waiting. I nodded. The vendor records, she said. Payments to Redline Advisory exceeded $4 million over 18 months. The supporting invoices do not match the services described. Mason's face became still. Richard turned toward him. Redline was approved through procurement. It was approved through an exception signed by your office, Rebecca said. Mason forced a laugh. This is becoming theatrical. Redline provided strategic research. Redline is registered to your brother's home address, I said. The laughter disappeared. Lauren looked at Mason as though a familiar object had changed shape. Your brother? She asked. He runs several consulting businesses. He runs one, Rebecca replied. And it was formed 11 days before the first Northbridge payment. Mason's gaze moved around the room, searching for support. The people who had surrounded him earlier now found reasons to study their phones. Influence is generous when nothing is at risk. Under pressure, it becomes very private. Richard stepped closer to me. We should not discuss incomplete findings in public. Then stop asking public questions. He glanced toward the remaining guests. I have protected this company for 12 years. You protected its image. His expression hardened. Those are often the same thing. No, I said. That belief is why Greyhaven is here. Rebecca opened the folder and placed one document on the auction table. It showed revised revenue projections for the quarter, along with the original numbers recovered from an archived server. The difference was more than $22 million. The official forecast presented to investors had included contracts that clients had not signed. Richard studied the page without touching it. Forecasts change. Dates do not, Rebecca said. The revised file was created after the clients postponed negotiations, not before. Lauren took a slow breath. She recognized the language on the document. I saw it in her eyes before she spoke. My department prepared the investor announcement. Rebecca turned to her. Your name is on the final approval. Lauren looked at me. Richard told us the contracts were delayed for administrative reasons. Did you ask for confirmation? I said. I asked Mason. Mason answered. Quickly. And I gave you the information available at the time. You gave me a statement and told me legal had cleared it. Legal did clear it. Rebecca shook her head. Internal legal requested changes. Those comments were removed before the document reached communications. The quartet had stopped playing. I had not noticed when. The silence around us was now complete enough to hear the air system running above the ballroom. Lauren stared at Mason. Earlier, she had leaned toward him when he spoke. Now she took one step away. You used my department, she said. Everyone used every department, Mason replied. That is how companies function. Not this one, I said. He looked at me with the first honest expression I had seen from him all night. It was not arrogance or fear. It was resentment. You think buying shares makes you understand Northbridge? No. Reading its records did that. Richard reached for the document, but Rebecca placed her hand over it. Copies have already been secured, she said. Nothing leaves this table. Margaret returned with 2 board members and informed Richard and Mason that their administrative access was suspended pending the morning meeting. Richard protested. Mason demanded to call his attorney. Both requests were answered calmly. Both men were escorted to a private room upstairs, not as criminals, but as executives whose authority had ended before they were ready to admit it. Lauren remained beside the auction table. Her face had lost the polished expression she had carried all evening. Am I suspended too? She asked. Your access remains active for the moment, Rebecca said. But you will be interviewed tomorrow. Lauren nodded, then looked at me. Did you buy Northbridge because of me? The question was quieter than everything else she had said that night. No, I answered. I nearly walked away because of you. She absorbed that slowly. I closed the folder and handed it back to Rebecca. The ballroom lights seemed harsher now, revealing empty glasses, abandoned place cards, and flowers beginning to bend beneath their own weight. Lauren touched the edge of the table. What happens tomorrow? She asked. The board decides. Who can still be trusted? And what happens to us? I looked at the woman who had erased me from a program, placed me near a service door, and laughed when another man called me dependent. Then I looked at the documents proving she had been used by the same people she had tried so hard to impress. That decision will not belong to the board, I said. By the time the final guests left, midnight had passed, and the ballroom looked ordinary again. The candles were being cleared. The flowers had begun to lean. Staff members moved quietly between tables, collecting glasses from people who had spent the evening discussing influence as though it could be held forever. Lauren stood near the windows with her coat folded over one arm. She had not spoken for several minutes. Neither had I. There are moments in a marriage when silence is not empty. It is crowded with every conversation that should have happened sooner. Are you coming home? She asked at last. I looked down at the city. Rain had turned to a thin snow that disappeared against the glass. Not tonight. Her fingers tightened around the coat. Where will you go? The hotel has a room for me. Ethan, please do not make a decision while everything is still fresh. This is not fresh. I turned toward her. Tonight was only the first time you said it where I could hear. She closed her eyes briefly. I was angry at myself. Not at you. Then why was I the one you diminished? She looked past me toward the empty executive tables. Because you made success look easy. You built a company, sold it, and walked away. I kept climbing, and every step felt like I had to prove I belonged there. People assumed I had connections. They assumed I had money behind me. I wanted one thing that was mine. It could have been yours without pretending I was nothing. Her face tightened. I know that now. You knew it then. That was the part she could not answer. Regret often arrives after consequences, dressed as revelation. I did not doubt that Lauren felt ashamed. I doubted whether shame had reached her before Margaret said my name. I did not know about Redline, she said. I did not know Richard changed the numbers. I believe you. Surprise crossed her face. Then you understand. I understand that you were manipulated by people you wanted to impress. That does not excuse what you chose to do to me. She looked down at her ring. Can we fix this? The question sounded smaller than the room. I remembered asking myself the same thing months earlier when she stopped inviting me to company events. I had answered yes every time without making her answer at all. I do not know, I said. But we cannot fix it by pretending this was one bad night. The elevator ride to the lobby was quiet. Lauren stood at one side of the mirrored car, and I stood at the other. Our reflections looked like strangers attending the same funeral. When the doors opened, a hotel employee brought her car around. She paused beneath the awning, snow catching in her hair. Will you be at the board meeting? She asked. Yes. What should I do? Tell the truth. She almost smiled, but the expression never formed. Even if it cost me my job? Especially then. She nodded once and walked toward the car. I watched the taillights disappear into downtown traffic, then returned upstairs to a room that smelled of clean linen and nothing familiar. I removed my wedding ring and placed it on the desk beside the hotel key. I did not feel free. I felt tired. At 7 the next morning, Greyhaven's audit team entered Northbridge headquarters. By 8, the boardroom was full. Margaret sat at the head of the table. Rebecca placed 3 binders in front of every director. Richard arrived with counsel. Mason arrived 10 minutes later with his own attorney. Lauren sat near the far end, without the confidence of the night before, but without the polished mask either. That mattered. Rebecca presented the findings in a voice so calm that each fact landed harder. Redline Advisory had received $4.3 million through contracts approved by Mason. Richard had authorized revised revenue forecasts after being informed that the underlying deals were uncertain. Internal legal objections had been removed from final documents. Communications had distributed the statements. Lauren did not interrupt. When her turn came, she admitted that she had approved language she did not fully verify. She explained the pressure from Richard and Mason, but she did not use it as an excuse. I wanted the promotion, she said. I wanted their trust, and I stopped asking the questions I should have asked. Her voice trembled only once. That failure is mine. The room stayed silent. The board voted before noon. Richard was removed as chief executive officer. Mason's employment was terminated for cause, pending further legal review. Lauren was placed on administrative leave while the ethics committee completed its investigation. I did not vote on her status. I wanted no one to say her future had been decided by a husband protecting her or punishing her. After the meeting, she waited for me in the hallway. Thank you for not interfering, she said. I did not do it for you. I know. She looked at the ring still on my hand, unaware that I had put it back on only because I was not ready to make a public statement. Is there still a chance for us? She asked. I looked through the glass wall at employees returning to their desks, people whose jobs depended on decisions made by those in that room. There may be a chance for honesty, I said. I am not ready to call it a marriage. 6 months later, Northbridge no longer felt like a company waiting for bad news. The hallways were still the same, the glass offices still reflected the Chicago skyline, and the elevators still opened with the same quiet chime, but the tension had changed. People spoke more openly in meetings. Engineers who had been ignored were invited into product reviews. Financial reports stopped using optimistic language to hide uncomfortable facts. We hired an interim chief executive officer from outside the company. A woman named Caroline Hayes who had spent 20 years rebuilding manufacturers without treating employees like numbers on a spreadsheet. She did not promise miracles. She promised accuracy. That was enough. The postponed client contract was renegotiated and signed. 2 senior engineers returned. Redline advisory disappeared from the vendor list, and every consulting agreement above $50,000 required independent approval. Northbridge did not recover because I walked onto a stage and announced ownership. It recovered because hundreds of people finally had permission to tell the truth without fearing the person above them. The scholarship fund became the part of the transition I cared about most. In June, we held the first award ceremony in a modest conference room instead of a ballroom. No champagne, no chandeliers, just folding chairs, coffee, and families wearing their best clothes. The first recipient was Hannah Ruiz, the daughter of a Northbridge maintenance technician who had worked the night shift for 14 years. She planned to study mechanical engineering at the University of Illinois. When I handed her the certificate, her father wiped his eyes and thanked me twice. I told him the scholarship existed because people like him had kept the company standing while executives argued about who deserved credit. That afternoon, I returned to my office and found a white envelope on the desk. Lauren's handwriting was on the front. We had been separated since the gala. She moved into an apartment near Lincoln Park and resigned from Northbridge before the ethics committee completed its review. The committee eventually concluded that she had shown poor judgment but had not participated knowingly in the financial misconduct. She could have stayed. She chose not to. Her resignation letter said she needed to rebuild a career without asking a title to repair what she disliked about herself. I respected that more than any speech she had given at the company. We met several times during those 6 months, usually at a quiet coffee shop halfway between our homes. There were no dramatic apologies and no promises made over music. We spoke about the apartment in Evanston, the years when we worked side by side, and the slow distance neither of us had been brave enough to name. Lauren admitted that success had become a room she feared being removed from. Every promotion made her more protective of the next one. Every compliment made her wonder when someone would discover she did not belong. Instead of telling me, she turned me into evidence that she had earned everything. Alone, I admitted my own failure. I had hidden behind calmness. I called it patience when it was often avoidance. I had watched our marriage become smaller and said nothing because I believed dignity meant never needing reassurance. Silence protected me from arguments, but it did not protect us. Understanding that did not erase what happened. It only made the ending honest. Lauren's letter was 3 pages long. She apologized without mentioning Mason, Richard, pressure, or the gala. She wrote that the worst thing she had done was not laughing at a cruel joke. It was spending years teaching other people that I was safe to disrespect. She said she finally understood that love could not survive where one person needed the other to appear smaller. At the end, she did not ask to come home. She wrote that she hoped one day I would remember the woman with the grocery store cupcakes, not only the woman at table 1. I read the letter twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I did remember that woman. I also understood that remembering who someone had been was not the same as trusting who they had become. Our divorce was finalized quietly in early fall. We divided what needed dividing and kept the process private. There was no victory in signing the papers, only closure. On the morning after the final hearing, I arrived at Northbridge before sunrise. The city below was still dark, and the office windows reflected my face back at me. On my desk sat the gold place card from table 14. Allison had found it during cleanup and mailed it to me months earlier. I kept it not as proof that they had underestimated me, but as a reminder of how easily a person can begin accepting the place others assign him. I turned the card over, placed it inside the drawer beside Lauren's letter, and walked into the morning meeting. For years, I thought power meant owning the room. I was wrong. Power was knowing I did not need the room to tell me what I was worth.